Welcome back to Floss Law. All right, we're on day 6 now of 10 days for the next 10 years. So 10 videos over the course of 10 days to give you the information you need to become a successful real estate investor for the next 10 years. Or 10 years from now, look back and you'll be a successful real estate investor. Far too many people, we talked about goals, setting goals back in 2010. Well, now it's 2020. You still haven't bought a property, still aren't where you want to be. We're going to fix that and make sure that we're not in that situation in 2030. All right, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you could hit subscribe, like the video, comment below, let me know anything you'd like to know, any comments that you have. If you're watching on Facebook, LinkedIn, any other platforms I'm on, just follow along, add me, and you can keep following along these videos as we're finishing this up through the rest of this week. A lot of really good topics for the end of this week. We're going to talk about hard money lending, private investors, a lot of good stuff, recreational marijuana. But today's topic, doing property inspections. Very important topic, not a sexy topic, not necessarily the one you probably want to watch right now. You're hoping for something a little bit more fun to watch, something more pertinent, but very important that we touch on property inspections. It's something that I've seen a lot of investors, particularly when you're doing income property, get tripped up on. So there was a point of emphasis for me that I wanted to do this. I really hope that you follow along and you watch this one. I think you're going to get a lot of value out of it. So when you buy an income property, it's very different than when you're buying a single family home or a condo. You probably seen that that's been a common thread throughout all the videos, through attorney review period, through finding the properties, through networking, through agents, and also when we're doing the inspection period. So when you're looking at a house, you're worried that everything inside the house is going to be perfect. You want to go pour over every nook and cranny and make sure that it's a really good house. It's going to be a good place for your family or for you. When you're looking at an investment property, you're not so much worried about the inside of the individual units, and we'll expand on that. But the units don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be great. The best analogy I can give you is, look back over the course of your life. Remember when you were in college. Remember when you were in your 20s. I bet you at some point you lived in an apartment that was a little bit of a hole, an S-hole. We all lived in one at some point. Doesn't mean it was a bad property. It's just the property owner knew that they didn't necessarily have to over-improve the property to keep it affordable. Same thing applies for you when you're buying your apartment buildings, when you're looking for investment property. Unless you're trying to be ultra high-end tenant, you don't have to make the units look amazing. Obviously, they want to be good. We don't want to be a slumlord. But you don't have to over-improve the properties either. And you'd be surprised when you're looking at, when you're buying fixtures for your house, you might be going to a fancy design studio and buying really high-end fixtures. When you're buying fixtures and supplies for an apartment building, they're actually significantly cheaper. You can buy, kitchen cabinets and get counters and buy the fixtures for an apartment unit for relatively cheap. When we're turning those units around, you can afford to not do the high end for everything. You can keep things at the base model, and it still looks good. People are going to rent them, so you don't have to blow out the budget there. The difference is you swap that around. If you have to do a new roof on your house or you need to do some plumbing, you have an idea how much it's going to cost. But when you're looking at that for an income property, it can get exponentially more expensive. So if we have to do a roof, if we have to do plumbing, if we have to do tuck pointing on a multifamily property, it's going to be way more expensive than you think it is. And I'll give you some examples in a minute, but I've seen investors get tripped up on that. And we label that capital expenditures. The capital expenditures are everything on that you as the investor are responsible for on the exterior. I shouldn't say exterior. The roof, the tuck pointing, the windows, the heat, the air, the plumbing, the electrical. All those are capital expenditures. You're spending money on the building, on your asset, not necessarily within the units, on the overall building itself. Now, doing that can be a huge benefit to you. So I've talked about in some of the previous videos, it's not uncommon for us to get apartment buildings where they have a huge old boiler on the building. Some of them are from, back like in the 50s. So if you take that old boiler out has your fuel costs through the roof, you're spending the money out of pocket to replace this boiler, to put a new one in. But by doing so, by spending the money out of pocket, your fuel costs may go down in half on the building. Now, by cutting your expenses on half, you don't come out of pocket for this year, but then next year, because you cut down those expenses so much, now the profit for the building has shot up. And anytime you can lower expenses and you can increase the net on the building, now the value for the property has gone up. So sometimes just replacing the boiler can create a huge amount of value for the property, and you now have an appreciating asset. So it's a very important thing. When you have your inspector, so you're going to hire an inspector, and you always have to hire an inspector. Don't ever buy a property without having an inspection done on a property. They always find something that's wrong with it, which doesn't mean you necessarily need to be worried or kill the deal or have credits or anything. But it's good to know that those things are an issue at the property, so you're aware of them, so you can plan on the future if you have to do something with it. You may never do anything with it, but just so you know that that's there. So always please get an inspection on the property. When you're doing a residential inspection, you're generally going to have someone that probably was a tradesman at some point. They probably did some, either was a contractor or did some work at some point in their life, so they have some familiarity of what things are supposed to be in a property. They have some familiarity with building codes. They have some familiarity with how a house is supposed to be put together. Which, and if they don't have experience with something, it's very common for the inspector to spend, 2-3 hours in the house and then go outside of the house and look at the roof and say, you're going to have to get someone who's a professional roofer to come out and give you their assessment of the roof. I don't really do roofs. I can just tell you how I think it looks. I think it looks okay, but you should have someone come out and look at it. And they'll kind of pass the buck on it, which is fine. I'd rather they do that than say it looks great and it turns out that there's something wrong with it. So I'd rather them say, hey, I don't really do roofs, you need to bring someone else in that knows that. Or, if they see something in the foundation and say, I don't know enough to say if that's a crack that's of concern or if that's just a normal crack, you probably want someone to come in and take a look at it. When you're dealing with an apartment building, you for sure want someone that's an experienced tradesman for a couple different reasons. One, you want them to be able to tell you what looks like is going to be a problem or not a problem for the building in the future, because that you're kind of banking on that as far as determining if this is a good investment for you or not. But also they can give you better guidance as far as how much maybe something's going to be. So a lot of times inspectors don't want to be on the hook for telling you how much a particular thing is going to cost. They kind of just tell you, look, here's the thing, it's up to you to determine that. It's very important when you're doing a building. We really want to know how much everything's going to be. Now, the professional inspector may still not want to do that. That's why a lot of investors I've seen, and I'm not crazy about it, and I'll tell you, I'll get back to it later, but a lot of investors will use their trusted contractor to go through the building for them. So they're not using a professional inspector, they're using a contractor that they've used on other properties to go through and say, hey, look at this property, let me know what you think of it, and let me know what you think we're going to have to fix in this property, either in the near future or over the long term, and give me prices for how much everything is. So normally you get an inspection, the inspector will tell you everything that's wrong, and then you would go back with your contractor to give you bids on everything. Some investors skip that step and just go straight to the contractor and say, just give me a rundown of everything you think that we're going to have to repair in here. I'm not terribly excited about that, because you need to for sure know that that contractor knows multifamily or investment properties. So I had a client recently, and we're still trying to clean up the mess that was made. A contractor went through an apartment building and told the client how much a particular a particular project, I don't want to get too much in details, but how much a particular project was going to cost. He said it was going to cost about $75,000. Client said, great, we budget that in. He bought the property. Well, a week after he bought the property, told the contractor to come back and let's start work. And it turned out that that $75,000 project was really going to cost closer to $150,000. The contractor, and it was of no malicious intent by the contractor. What we quickly found out is he was in way over his head. So this particular contractor is very skilled at turning over units, and those are different levels of contractors. This particular contractor is very good when a tenant would leave, send this guy in, and he would turn it around. He'd get it painted. If the cabinets need to get replaced, he replaced cabinets. There's an appliance needed to get replaced, he replaced the appliance. There was damage in the bathroom, he'd get the tile done, work real quick, and he'd turn them around in, a weekend or a week or 2 weeks, depending on how much work needed to be done, so we could get a new tenant in there as quickly as possible. He was really good at that. He was really affordable. He'd keep the costs low. And you'll find out with apartment buildings, you can cut corners and go with more basic models for a lot of that stuff. You can really get units turned over for a pretty affordable price most of the time, a lot cheaper than you think you can, because you're used to buying things at market rate. You're used to going to Studio 41 and buying the real fancy fixtures and buying all the cute stuff for your place that you're going to live in. When you're talking about an income property, you can go with real base stuff. Sometimes we're buying stuff out of warehouses, and you're getting them for a real cheap price, so it doesn't cost as much as you think it does to turn those units over. He was kind of used to doing that. So when it came time to really doing a gut to this particular area of the building that ended up needing significant amount of concrete work, he didn't know that the concrete work alone for the project that they were trying to do for the building was going to cost somewhere around $40,000 to $50,000. He didn't even realize it. He thought that was going to be a couple thousand when it was really a $40,000 to $50,000 line item just for that. So obviously that blew the budget out of the water. The client was relying upon a contractor that was not in his field of experience, and it led him down a bad road. So you need to know if your contractor is experienced with doing big apartment building projects like this. It's much more involved. You also want to know whoever you're sending through the property, whether it's a licensed inspector or if it's a contractor, has experience with working on or experience inspecting apartment buildings. So it's a completely different a set of circumstances. I'm big on in Chicago, I want to know, do all the windows and lintels look good? I want to make sure that he gets up on the roof, make sure the roof looks good. Sometimes with apartment buildings it can be difficult or awkward to get up on the roof. Sometimes there'll be like a little hatch and you have to bring a ladder to get up to it so you can get up there. If you have the wrong kind of inspector, they may say, oh, I can't get up there, I didn't bring my ladder. No, that's like one of your primary responsibilities, in my opinion. You need to have your ladder, you need to get up there, we need to make sure that there's no issues on that roof. Obviously making sure the tuck pointing is good. I want to know that the windows are of good quality. Do they have any broken seals? Because that's going to affect your utility costs. I want to make sure there's no water running into the units. It's causing water damage. It can cause mold. And I want to check the lintel is the metal strip over the top of windows that you see in a lot of apartment buildings that they can get rusted out. In order to replace those, sometimes you have to remove the brickwork or remove the window or both to replace that lintel. I had a client with a property that got cited for rusted lintels by the city, and they said, you're going to have to replace them. He said, okay. He had a contractor come out. That contractor told him, with this particular building, we're basically going to have to take all the brickwork apart. We're going to have to take all the windows apart. We're going to have to put everything back together. We're going to have to relay the brick. We're going to have to re-tuck point. So the bid came out to $7,500 per window. This building had about 100 windows on it. So you can imagine my client was really not happy, and we had to go back to the city and said, listen, there's no way that all 100 of them need to be replaced. Why don't you tell us exactly which ones you think need to be replaced, or work with us a little bit there. So that was an uncomfortable experience because the contractor that he had sent through that building didn't really identify that, didn't really focus on that. He just ran through the units and didn't look at the exterior of the property closely enough. So you need to really make sure that you have someone that knows what they're looking at with an income property, the issues that you have with an income property, as opposed to like a house or something like that. It's apples to oranges. It's not the same thing. The other thing with a contractor, I kind of go back and forth with a lot of my clients about this. Some of them really, like I said, they don't really care, if the units need a facelift or not. They might know going in that maybe the building has some deferred maintenance and it's going to need work and the unit's going to need a facelift, so they don't care. But the issue you can run into is if you send your contractor through the property, do you really trust that contractor, and do you trust the feedback you're getting from that contractor? So I had, now this is going back several years, this wasn't recent, this is several years ago, but I had a client that had a trusted contractor. He was turning over units, he was turning over properties fairly quickly for him, so they had a good rapport, and he was sending this contractor to go look at properties for him, and he would say, look, this was an out-of-state investor, so this is even a step further. This is an out-of-state investor who's relying on this contractor to really be his eyes and ears on the ground. So he's buying properties from out of state, saying, look, I want you to go through, take pictures of the property, give me your report of what your evaluation of the property is and what the amount of the repairs are going to be. So we did that for a few months with this guy, sending information back. He was doing okay. He wasn't doing it as thorough as the investor had requested, which was an issue, number one. He wasn't really like taking pictures. He was just giving a written report or an oral report, which is even worse because then you can't go back to it. And we noticed that after a while it wasn't matching up. And what wasn't matching up was if we thought a building was good, he would come back and say it was bad. And if we thought a building was bad, he would come back and say it was really good. And it started to develop a pattern. We're like, it's really weird that these turnkey properties he's saying are bad, and these other properties he's saying are really good. And we went back and looked at it, and what we figured out was the contractor, if he was going through a property and the building needed no work, it was good to go, it was a turnkey property, was telling my client it was bad. It was bad because he wasn't going to get paid for doing any work in the building. That was his classification. This is bad because I'm not going to make any money in here. If he went through the building and the building needed a ton of work, he was saying, this is amazing, you need to buy it tomorrow, because he was going to make a ton of money, or, six-figure rehab. He'd say, oh, we need to buy this now. That was his classification standard. So, luckily we figured that out pretty fast and didn't buy any bad properties relying on that information, because it became very clear pretty early on that something wasn't matching up. And then we figured it out, and we're like, okay, well, we can't send this guy because he's not reliable. But that's the danger when you're relying upon the contractor, because the contractor is representing you, or you're hoping that they're representing you, but they're still in this to make money, and they're making money based on if they have to do work to the property. So the more work, or if the property doesn't need work, is going to sway their opinion that they're giving to you. They're not impartial to it. So that's the reason why I'm a little mixed on sending contractors through. But again, the reason that some investors do decide to use a contractor is a lot of times the property inspectors are not willing to submit a bid or an estimate of the cost of repairs, and that the investors really need that to factor that in. It's not enough for you to tell the investor that the building needs tuck pointing. That's good to know, but the first thing the investor is going to say is, okay, it needs tuck pointing. How much tuck pointing is, how much is the tuck pointing going to be for this building? Now, if you've done it in a particular area with a building of a similar size, you could be in a ballpark, but I've seen it vary too. I've seen it even with investors. I've seen it vary with contractors. I've seen contractors all over the board with their prices too. They'll give you an introductory price, and then it'll be a different price for the next building. And you factored in the prices that they gave you for the last property, but you didn't realize they were giving you kind of like an introductory bait price. And then when you stick with them and you give them the next property, all of a sudden their prices shoot up. I don't have any extreme examples of it with the exterior of the property. The first thing that comes to mind was we did have, I had a client that sent a contractor in and they had just bought a building and they wanted to gut a couple of the units to really make them nice to get high-end tenants in there. And the contractor did the first unit, and this is again a couple years ago, so I'm a little hazy now the exact numbers, but I want to say he charged them, maybe $600, $700, $800 for the demo, just the demo of that unit. He's thinking, wow, that's a really great price. So then when he got to unit, 3, 4, 5, he was just telling the contractor, just, all right, what you did with that unit, just go ahead and do it with the next unit. So when he got the invoices, the contractor then was charging him $4,000 or $5,000 for the demo. He's going, well, you charged me $800 for the other one. I thought it was going to be $800 for these. And he was like, well, no, that was just sort of my introductory price. And now that we've established a relationship, that's how much I really should be charging you for demo. So you need to be careful for that kind of stuff too. It can be tough, and unfortunately, I see investors have to go through a lot of different contractors for those kinds of reasons, because you get involved with them, and then all of a sudden the prices start going all over the board. So it's not uncommon to have investors. I found particularly multifamily that just constantly have different contractors all the time. That's one of the issues that we have with multifamilies. There's always different contractors coming through at any particular time. It's hard to get stability on that part of it. Now, getting back to the property inspection portion of it when you're doing the buy side. So now you've gone through, you sent either your trusted contractor, your property inspector through, and now you have all these issues that are on the property. We go back and we sometimes have to renegotiate the deal. Sometimes we just ask for a price reduction. Sometimes we ask for a credit. When you get a credit, that's a reduction to the amount of money that you have to bring to closing. So if you say you get a credit of $20,000 because you have to replace the boiler, if when you go to closing, if you originally, after you got your loan on the property, had to bring a down payment of $100,000, well, now you're really only bringing $80,000 because you're getting that credit. So it reduces the amount of money you're not walking away. I had this recently with someone. You're not walking away with a check for $20,000 for the boiler at closing. It's reducing the amount of money you're bringing to the closing, so you should still have that other $20,000 sitting in your bank account. So it saved the amount of money you're bringing to the closing. So we negotiate those things. Sometimes we just reduce the purchase price. There's a number of different things we do in those circumstances. Sometimes also, though, you're dealing with a property where the seller isn't willing to negotiate any of that kind of thing, or maybe there's an opportunity with the property where you see it's in an area that's really turning over, and you really want to get aggressive. Maybe you already have it for a really good price, and you're willing to say, "Look, I got it for this price. I'm buying this building for $1.3 million, and I know for a fact, based on what I see going on in the neighborhood, there's improvements in the neighborhood, and I'm going to raise the rents, and I'm going to do some work on the building, and I know when I get done with it, this building's going to be worth $2 million. So I know that there's a bunch of stuff wrong with the property. I just need to know what those things are, and we're just going to buy it anyway. We don't really care." That certainly happens too. So any number of different things can happen. I also have had situations where we go back and we say, "Look, we really like this building. We really like the numbers. We like everything involved with it, but my God, we found every possible thing we could find wrong with this building because you guys have not been maintaining it. So sorry, we said we were going to buy this thing for $700,000, but at this point, we would only be interested if you dropped the price down to $500,000. That kind of stuff happens too. There's very dramatic price shifts sometimes in commercial for those reasons, because again, going back to determining the value of a property, it's only worth what the cash flow is for the building. So if there's a bunch of things wrong with the building and we have to come out of pocket for a ton of capital expenditures for this property, now it's not going to cash flow. It will cash flow down the line, but it's not for a while. We're going to have to come out of pocket. We might not cash flow for a couple of years. So we're not going to give you the value of what it's going to be worth in a couple of years. We're going to give you value for what it's worth right now, and it's worth a lot less. So and sometimes the sellers will just say, okay, they know. I mean, sometimes they know, sometimes they don't know, sometimes they're not willing to come down in price, or sometimes it's almost like they got caught and they're just like, okay, fine, and it's always surprising and a little scary When stuff like that happens, when you have a dramatic price reduction for something you discovered on the property, like, wow, we came really close to making a really bad buy there. But that's why you have to do your due diligence. A lot of that kind of stuff can happen. I've had wacky, crazy things happen in both the attorney review and inspection period for buildings. I've had a buyer go to a multifamily property where the numbers look great, everything looked great. Buyer showed up to the property to walk the building, because sometimes you do these things a little bit sight unseen in the initial offering procedure. So this client, again, was from out of town. I get a lot of out of town investors. This client's from out of town. I like the numbers on the building, put an offer in. We're trying to finalize everything, came in to do the inspection, and there was literally no roof on the building. There were tenants in there, and you can imagine when they went in there to go look at the building, I guess they had either partially torn the roof off or torn the roof off and didn't put it back on. Or didn't have the money to put it back on, or just the guy didn't come back because he didn't get him paid, or whatever the circumstances was. All I know is my client called me and said, there's no roof on this building, and there's just water running down the walls, and there's people living here still, and the tenants are furious. So we just went ahead and canceled that deal. I think we did actually throw him a bone. We said that we would still buy the building, but for like half of what the initial offer was, and the seller said no. So we just walked away from the deal, and the realtor was super embarrassed because the realtor had not walked the property himself. He was just like, oh my God, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. So, and that kind of stuff happens too, unfortunately. I had to kill a deal in attorney review, which I never like having to do. But I had to kill a deal because I was pouring over the income and expenses for a property, and they had said that there was no heat bill, that the tenants paid the heat. And we went through the property when I asked for the itemized expenses for the property, and I was doing the review, found that there was a $40,000 a year heat bill for the building after they said that there wasn't one. So obviously when you add a $40,000 expense on a property, that's going to have a huge impact on the value of the property. It didn't cash flow. So we had to go back and we said, look, we'll still be interested in this building, but we need you to drop the price like 200 grand because you didn't tell us about a $40,000 heat bill. Like what was that? And they just said no. They weren't willing to drop the price, even though they had lied to us about the expenses. So we just walked away from the table from that one. So with commercial, it's really important that you pour over everything. You know, everyone's always very concerned, like when you're buying a rehab. Everyone's always concerned when you're buying like a fix and flip house. Like, oh, make sure the contractor did everything right. Let's make sure they pull their permits. Let's make sure that they're reputable when nothing's gonna be wrong with the house. I gotta be honest with you. I get just as much, if not more, problems with that in rental properties in the multifamily sector. People either forget things, lie about things, or they just don't know. So when you're dealing with third parties on top of third parties, meaning you're dealing with a owner that's out of the country and they're relying on a property manager, and the property manager's got basically subcontracting to some other person. They have an employer, independent contractor, and the property manager's never even been to the property. They have someone else taking care of it. So you're relying upon that information, and then your buyer's out of state that's relying upon a contractor that's got he was busy, so he sent his sub to go look at the property. So now you're relying upon multiple third-party information. So sometimes when we start really looking at these properties and really taking a fine-tooth comb over them, it's just a disaster where we have conflicting information. People lied about stuff. People, someone gave someone information they thought it was true that wasn't. They said that there's 12 tenants. It turns out there's only 8 in the building right now. We just get weird stuff. So it's really crucial that you pour over all these things. I haven't had it in a while. Just knock on wood, I haven't had it in a while. But I had a stretch for a while of buildings where in Chicago they're really big on porches. We have to pull permits for porches. It's a very strict process. The porches have to adhere to a very strict code. Because we were having issues for a while where older porches were on building, wood porches were on the backs of these buildings, and they were collapsing because they just were not installed properly. We have very severe winters in Chicago, and they weren't holding up. So they're very strict on making sure if a porch doesn't look good, you're going to have to tear it down and replace it, and they get expensive. I had a stretch for a while, I don't know what it was, but where sellers were selling properties, they had the permits pulled, they had permanent contractors that had done work to the porch, and we still, like a year later, the city came back and cited us violations because the porches were still not up to code, and we had to go back and try to chase the previous contractors. Of course, they were ghosts at that point. They were gone. Trying to go back to the previous seller. The seller's like, look, I was relying upon the contractor. He said he knew what he was doing. He had a permit. The permit got inspected. It's not my fault that they're coming back 3 years later and saying that the porch that we had permanent work done still needs more work done. Like, I can't control that. I had a handful of those in a row where it's like, who's doing these porches that they're not, and who's the inspector that signed off on this? Luckily, I haven't had that in a few years. Again, that's kind of quieted down. So I think whoever those bad porch guys were must have gone out of business or skipped town. Thank God. The more bad contractors that go out of business, the better, from my standpoint. So you're on the lookout for that. It's really hard to get someone to go on the hook for, speaking of porches, to go on the hook for saying a porch looks good or bad. It's easy to find someone to say, hey, the roof looks great, boiler looks great, tuck pointing looks great, the windows look great. Say, hey, can you certify and let me know that porch looks good? They are not going to go on the hook for that, because I've seen the best of porches and the city came back and said you still didn't do it right, and seen what I thought was a bad looking porch and they're like, actually they did everything right, so it's still good, there's nothing wrong with that one. So the porches are a tough one to have an inspector tell you if everything was done right or not. They drive me crazy, the porches. All right, so the most important things, I'm big on roofs, because I hate it when the investor comes back and they say the guy didn't get on the roof, and then it turns out we have to do a roof tear off. It's such an easy thing to inspect. Go up there and take pictures on it, and then we're spending money on something we could have anticipated. So the big thing is we want to figure out what the prices are for those things and incorporate that in and negotiate that in the deal. Because again, and I can't emphasize this enough, apartments are about cash flow. So if there's something interfering with the cash flow, you're going to have to spend money on that's going to mess with the cash flow. It still could be a good investment. We just have to incorporate that into the investment. So, if you're buying a house and it turns out the HVAC's busted, the roof needs to get replaced, thinking, I'm not buying this house sucks. If you're looking at income property, the roof needs to get replaced, the boiler's busted, still could be a great property. We just have to price that in, because it's all about cash flow. So if you like the building at $500,000 and you got a road to a roof tear off and you got to replace the boiler, it still could be a great property. It's just a great property at maybe $440,000 instead of $500,000. It's just pricing it in. It still could be a really good investment. We just have to price the investment accordingly. I'm a big believer in that. That I if I have a client that really likes a property, almost every property we can find a way to make it work as a good investment. It just has to be priced accordingly. The only I don't. In my viewpoint, I don't kill deals because of the inspection went bad or the attorney review went bad. I kill deals because after we've done the inspection and attorney review period, the actual numbers of the building don't match the value that we have placed upon that building. So when we're doing the buyer review, we're determining what do we believe the value of this property is, and then we look at what the contract price is, what the sellers agreed upon, or the letter of intent that we have on the property, and we go back and go, look, here's your value, here's what we believe is the actual value of the property, and trying to come to an agreement on those terms. And when you're dealing with a house, sometimes it's a meeting in the middle. We don't get a ton of meeting in the middle with investment properties. It could be, look, and I just had this the other day, they're asking 3.9. That's great, except we poured over the numbers and we really think this building's worth about 3.1. 3.9 is way overly aggressive. If you want to work with us, we will work with you at 3.1. And so when the inclination when you're working with like a single family house, thinking, oh, we'll meet at the middle at like 3.6. No, if we determine it's worth 3.1, we're paying 3.1. If we meet in the middle at 3.5 or 3.6, we're still overpaying for the property. We're not meeting you at the middle at a price that's still overpaying. So it's, in that respect, dealing investment property is a little bit different. There's still some room to work there a little bit. You know, maybe we would come up to 3.2, 3.3 to come up with a reasonable number. But a lot of times we're working with more hard numbers of, look, you're there and we're here. Show us how, convince us why it's worth your number, because we've determined that this is our number. So, and sometimes it can be the reverse. Sometimes you as the buyer are convincing the seller, like, look, you're here. I know that sounds nice. I know that number sounds good to you, but here's all the factual information for the building. Here's your income. Here's your expenses. We reviewed everything. Here's your eviction record for the building because we looked at the last 12 months. Here's your poor rental performance. Here's the repairs that we see that you need on the property. So we determined that your value is here. And sometimes this, and not all the time, so I don't want to get your hopes up, but we do sometimes get situations where we make that presentation to the seller and the seller's like, wow, you're right. I had this priced all wrong. Maybe the seller isn't paying attention. Maybe the seller's out of town. Sometimes you get sellers that are out of the country, out of state, and they're relying on other, again, third party information. So sometimes you need to inform them and say, look, here's the conditions that you have here. Here's the correct pricing. This is what we're willing to come in at. Let us know if you want to work with us or not. And that's where you do sometimes get dramatic price reductions on property. We can get very aggressive purchases on property by laying your case out. It doesn't always work that way. Sometimes you get savvy sellers that just are willing to, they like the property, but they see the economic factors and they think they can push the value and get a lot of money out of the building. So, you know, you say you're at 3.9, we're going to come at 3.1. They're saying, look, if there's someone that'll give me 3.9, I'll take 3.9. Otherwise, I like the building, I'll just keep it. I don't need to take $800,000 less. So obviously it's not going to work on that type of seller, but there's certainly other sellers that maybe are more of a situation where they would like to cash out. They would like to just be done with the property. Again, we talked about the other day. I love finding buildings where there's bad management in place, because that's where you can usually make an aggressive buy, because you're dealing with a seller who's just looking to walk away, is frustrated, is done with the whole thing, and just wants to get out of there. So now you can come in and state your case of, look, here's A, B, C, D, E, F, G of how I come up with this value. Do you agree? And sometimes they'll just say, fine, just, I want to be done with it. Fine, just take the building. So that's where doing all of your research comes into play here. That's where doing all of your research comes into play with you doing these properties. And that all starts with doing a really good property inspection, because if you don't do those things, going back to the same analogy, that building that they're asking 3.9 for, you might not, if you don't get a good inspection, you don't know about the roof and the boiler and some of the other things that are on there, you might say, wow, based on these numbers, this is a great property for 3.5, and you pay 3.5 for it, and you totally overpaid for it because you buy the building and you find out that your first year in there, you have $100,000 worth of work you need to do this building now. And you really should have paid way less for the property. That all starts with getting a good inspection done to the building. Surprises will kill you in doing investment property. It will destroy your profits if you run into surprises with the property. I've had several investors where that's happened to them, and they'll be able to get out and break even, and we can kind of start over from scratch, but you don't always do. You don't always have the ability to break even. Sometimes you're stuck with a bad property because now you can't even sell it because you got talked into a bad buy. You can't even sell it for what you paid for it because you made such a bad buy because you didn't know about all these repairs. It's a bad situation to be in, and we make the best of it, but you can eliminate that by making sure that whoever you're relying upon to go through that building to give you their opinion is someone that you trust is giving you an impartial and accurate opinion of how much things are going to cost in the building. It's unbelievably crucial. I'm just checking to make sure we hit everything on my little notes here. I just talked about killing your profits. I'll talk a little bit. I want to keep this broad for everybody, but in Chicago, we certainly have difficulty with apartment buildings having issues. So I talked about the heat cases every year that we have to go to. You can get violations on a property for a variety of things. You can get you get little love letters in the mail from the city of, hey, you didn't mow your lawn and the weeds were a foot high, so here's a $500 ticket. The trash was out in the alley, so here's a $500 ticket, and you can accumulate those very quickly too. If it hasn't been done in a couple of days, you get another $500 ticket, which is not fun. So we want to make sure that there's nothing in the property where we're going to start getting love letters from the city of Chicago. The porches are a big thing. Those lintels are a big thing because they can walk by and they can see those, and now we're getting cited and we have to start getting fined, and we have to do the repairs because now there's a court case open on the property. So what happens if they see something that's wrong with the building, they file a lis pendens. A lis pendens is a notice of foreclosure. Now, the city of Chicago isn't going to foreclose the property and take it, but they file this pendants that there's a lien on the property, and now you're put on notice, or both you, your lender, and any potential buyers are put on notice that this is on the property. There's violations, cited violations on the property, and they have to be completely repaired and inspected and signed off in order to close those cases out. So we want to make sure as much as possible that we don't get on the city of Chicago's radar with the building, because once you get on the radar with the building, it is really hard to get off their radar. They zero in on you. So I discount heavily if a building has a history of that, because it could be very difficult to get out of that. And once they're watching you to make sure that there's no violation of the building, it's almost like they just keep watching you, and you can't get them to look away from you. Versus there's some properties that have no history of violations on there, and it's fantastic. You never get on the city's radar with particular buildings. There's just some properties where it's just you can't get away from them. They're just following you constantly, watching you, citing you for things, never ending. So keep that in mind too. If you're looking at a property and they're going, oh, it's not a big deal, it's just the city, found some stuff wrong with the property. I want to price that in too. I want to price that in the. Sometimes it takes years to get those cases off of there. So don't let the seller be like, oh yeah, it's not a big deal. It's kind of a big deal. It's a little bit of a big deal. So don't get stuck with those cases, because if you do have because it's a lis pendens, it can prevent you from refinancing the property. So if you go in on a property with like a hard money loan, you can get the hard money loan with those violations on there because they're giving you the money to try to repair it to get those violations off of there. But then when you try to refi out to more of a regular commercial loan, that's going to block you. They potentially may not refi with that lis pendens on there. So then you're stuck with this hard money loan, and you're paying a very high interest rate while you're trying to get this off the property. Now, there are, and this is part of picking a good contractor. There's some contractors that are very highly skilled at cranking those out. They have no problem with going in, pulling all the permits, getting all the work done, getting the city in there, inspecting everything, and getting those cases closed out. I've got some investors and I've got some contractors that it's like nothing. They don't even bat an eye. They go in there, but typically those are the more expensive contractors because they're hitting everything. They're there at the property every day. You're paying them top dollar, but first time out, first time it's up in court, that case is done. The inspector goes, everything in this property is perfect, case dismissed. And I have some properties that have been in violation court for 4 years because every time the inspector goes back, the contractor has no idea what's going on. If the contractor has no idea what's going on, how is he doing the proper repairs to the building to get it, in the within the building code regulation? So, every time I go back to court, I'm going, yeah, they told me that all the repairs are done. The inspector's like, yeah, the repairs are done. Like crap. So you need to go back and do them again because it looks terrible in there still. I'm like, okay. And whenever you get a continuance on those cases, they're far out continuances. So that's not like, oh, we'll come back in a week. They'll say, all right, you didn't get the inspection done. We'll see you in 6 months. It's a very busy courtroom, so they don't have time to give you a short date. So if I go there in September, they'll say, we'll see you in April. So if you're trying to get repairs done and get a property refinanced, if you don't hit the court date, woo, good luck. You're stuck with it for like another 6 months, paying that high interest rate loan, and so we get to the next court date, we can try to get it closed out. We can try to get them heard ahead of time. We can notice up, try to get them heard ahead of time, but you better have it all done, because if you push the court date up and you still don't have it done, now they're really not going to be happy with you. Believe me. So, all right, let's stay with the inspections. Just pricing. Everything on here, I just have on here pricing, creating value in the property, reflecting the value in the property with the cost of all the repairs that need to be done to the property. And, you know, I am probably scaring some of you who are long distance investors. I have a ton of long distance investors. My previous record was London, and then I broke that record a couple years ago with Poland, and then I broke that record a couple years ago right after with Israel, and then I very recently last year broke that record. I now have someone with property in Chicago from Australia. So I got people all over the world with property here that we help keep an eye on. You know, I'm helping keep things running. I communicate with the property management company with any legal issues we have on the property. So don't want you to be scared away from long distance investing because I'm telling you all these horror stories. Oh my God, the contractor is going to go in there and lie to you, and the seller is going to lie to you, and all that. I need you to be prepared. I need you to be knowledgeable. I need you to evaluate the people that you're working with to know that you're trusting them and that they're giving you good information for you to rely upon. I have way too many cases that I'm dealing with where people relied upon bad actors. People relied upon bad people. People that sound really good and look really good and have a wonderful presentation and can't property manage further if their life depended on it, or can't execute a rehab if their life depended on it. They look awesome and drive a really nice car, don't know the first damn thing about completing the turnover of the acquisition of an apartment building. I see it all the time. So don't be blinded by a really awesome presentation. You want to know track record. You want to know what their experience is. You want to know what they've seen before. Hear their war stories. I want to know your war stories. I want to know that you've been in the trenches. I want to know that you have experience. I want to know, you know, all the bad things that you've seen, because I want to know that you know what you're looking at. I don't, you know, it's not all going to be, you know, and the caution I would probably give is if everyone talks about everything being amazing all the time, is kind of a red flag for me, because it's not amazing all the time. I'm the attorney. I'm the guy that has to deal with everything going wrong all the time. So that's my experience. I typically have to be the Debbie Downer. Usually the agent is building you up, and then I have to kind of bring it back down a little bit. I try not to do it too much because, you know, I don't want to be, you know, the depressing guy. I don't want to be Debbie Downer all the time. But sometimes you need to sit down and be like, look, here's the deal. And you know, I always try to keep the deals alive, but I'm going to say, look, we need a price adjustment, we need a credit, we need something here to make this a good investor for the buyer. Part of what I don't like is if you see someone who is talking about how everything's going to be perfect and everything's going to be amazing. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be amazing. Owning income property is a very bumpy road, and at best it's a bumpy road. At best, it's a bumpy road. It's not going to be smooth. There's going to be stuff all the time. The tenants are always mad about something. They're always mad about something. They're always calling about something. There's always going to be a little bump in the road here and there. So if someone's saying it's going to be perfect, it's going to be flawless, it's going to be turnkey, you're going to go in, you're going to have this property, there's going to be no rent collection issues. No. It's just not. There's no way. It doesn't work that way. You have to be prepared for that kind of stuff. You have to be able to deal with the things that are going to happen. You're going to get a stupid violation from the city once in a while. You're going to get a tenant that's just a complete nut job once in a while. You're going to get stuff that's just going to, it's not going to be a smooth ride. It never is. But we can prepare for that. We can be ready for that. We can be able to anticipate what we're going to do when those situations come up. We can, if we know it's a property that's going to happen more often, we can price that in. Look, we're going to be dealing with BS from the tenants all the time. So we don't want this for an 8 cap. We need this at a 10 cap. We're pricing in the pain in the butt factor with the building, for lack of a better term. You're just putting that all in there. You're incorporating that all in. So just make sure, if you're someone who's watching this video and you're in an area, you're in a country, you're in a state where it's very difficult for you to find good investments. Your area may be too expensive. Your area just may not have a lot of multifamily. You might be in a heavily residential area, and it's hard to find multifamily that aren't like those jumbo multifamily, those developments are like 500 units. It's hard to be able to go in on something like that unless you pull together and do like a syndication or something. So to find an area where you have a good tenant pool, where you can get entry-level multifamily, 6, 12, 18, 24 unit buildings, you might have to go someplace far away. I want you to be comfortable with being able to do that. Just know that you need to be able to properly evaluate people. You want to know that your home or your property inspector is familiar with multifamily properties. You want to know that your contractors are familiar either with, and you can separate it out. You can have a contractor who's on your team who's very skilled at turning over units. There's some guys that are just amazing at that. Just boom, it's done, and now you can re-rent it to a tenant. And then there's contractors that are very skilled at the actual building itself. And make sure you have someone that's equipped for that. You're going to need to have a go-to person in case something comes up the porch with a roof, with the windows, with the tuck pointing. And it's not like you're going to hire just a regular residential guy or girl to do that. You need someone who's skilled in that particular area, in that particular field. There's contractors that sometimes won't drive far. They only work in a certain pocket. Or maybe if you're in, and what happens a lot, unfortunately, if you're working in like a D area, D-class neighborhood, so like A is an amazing neighborhood, B is more like a decent neighborhood, you might have some issues. C is, there's some rocky rent collection issues. It's still a decent area. It's like blue collar, but you might have some issues here and there. And D is, there's major issues. There's, high crime area, or the building just has a history of really, really poor rent performance, or whatever the case may be. If you're buying a building that's maybe in like maybe it's a C building in a D area, or a D building in a C area, which is, we get a lot of that. Mostly people want to buy, maybe like the D building in a C area so they can do improvements to the building and bring it up. When we're dealing with something like that, sometimes we run into an issue of we're called an inspector or a contractor who does not go in that area. So maybe keep that in mind too, that if you decide you want to look at doing C and D class buildings, which are usually very profitable buildings if they're run correctly and you've done everything correctly, you might need to find different sets of contractors and inspectors based on different neighborhoods. So if you're looking at B neighborhoods, you might have one inspector and one contractor, and you're looking at D properties, you might have a completely different inspector and a completely different set of contractors, because the contractors that work in AB neighborhoods, when you call them and say, hey, I need you to do work on my building in this D building or this D neighborhood, they're going to say, I don't even go near that neighborhood, because the last time I went there, I parked my truck and I came out and all the tools were gone out of my truck. So find someone else to do it. We run into that very, very often. Unfortunately, we run into that. I have a lot of contractors I know are very good that I can refer a lot of business to, and they're just like, I don't go over there, so don't call me about that stuff. They've just flat out told me, because they've had bad experiences. The truck's gone, the tools are gone out of the truck, whatever. So or you could be dealing with an area where when the contractors go in the morning, every morning there's squatters in the building and they have to try to kick them out. Some contractors are okay with doing that kind of stuff, and some contractors are like, you're not paying me enough to deal with that kind of nonsense. So that's the difference that you can run into with some of these guys. So make sure also when you're vetting people that you need to know if they're going to work with you in the different neighborhoods that you plan on working in, because you might get find a really good guy or girl and say, all right, here's the building I found. They're going to go, I don't do that. I don't do that building. I don't do that neighborhood, whatever the situation may be. I'm trying to get a deal done right now. I think we're going to close soon. Knock on wood. We kept sending the appraiser back out. Every time the appraiser went out, someone had kicked in the back door. I mean, it was like 5 times in a row. We resecured the property. Appraiser went back. Door kicked in, and he was like, look, I'm not going in there. I don't care if it's just a guy sleeping. I'm not going in there. I don't get paid enough for dealing with that. So you get those kind of issues. So just know what neighborhood you're working in. Know the contractor and what their limitations are, and interview people accordingly, and make sure you have a good rapport with them. You know how they work. They have good communication with them. Communication is crucial, because unfortunately contractors are a victim too. If a project isn't going well, we'll just not return phone calls, and we'll kind of ghost you because they don't want to have to answer for the problems that are at the property, or maybe something didn't work out the way it was supposed to. So just make sure that you can rely upon them as a trusted member of your team. That's my one requirement. So we talked about property inspections for a lot longer than I thought we were. Wow. Hope you liked the video. Comment below, let me know, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.